To help her boyfriend, Aline gave him everything she had, her savings, her trust, and her unwavering support. She believed in him wholeheartedly, convinced that their love and shared dreams would carry them through any hardship. But only a month later, without any explanation, he vanished. The heartbreak was overwhelming. The reason for his disappearance, when she finally discovered it, broke her even more, leaving her in tears. He had used her. The promises he made were empty, and the love she thought they shared was a facade. He had taken everything and left, shattering not only her heart but her faith in people. Aline had always been someone who chose the less valued path in a world that often viewed beauty and intelligence as mutually exclusive. While her family, especially her mother, had placed a heavy emphasis on looks and finding a rich husband, Aline chose intelligence, valuing her education and independence above all. Growing up, she had watched her older sister Dorothea navigate life by leaning on her beauty, receiving attention and admiration, but Aline knew that route wasn't for her. She didn't want to rely on anyone else to define her worth or success. Despite her family's disapproval, Aline worked tirelessly to secure a spot at university. It wasn't easy. Financial struggles weighed heavily on her, but she was determined to escape the confines of her upbringing and prove that her intelligence and hard work could open doors. Her dream was to study economics, to break free from the expectations placed upon her, and to chart her own course in life. Amid the emotional turmoil of her recent heartbreak, Aline's world was turned upside down again when she met Wesley, a modest musician with his own set of dreams. Their meeting wasn't planned, nor was it something Aline had been looking for. She had sworn off love, convinced that her focus should remain solely on her studies and personal growth. But Wesley was different. He wasn't flashy or wealthy like the men her mother had always pushed her toward. Instead, he was genuine, humble, and passionate about his music. Wesley's quiet determination resonated with Aline. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune, he was chasing his dream for the love of music. In him, she found something she hadn't realized she was missing, a partner who understood the value of perseverance and ambition. Their connection grew slowly but steadily. At first, Aline hesitated, still wounded from the betrayal of her past relationship, but Wesley was patient. He didn't rush her or demand anything she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he supported her, encouraging her to keep pushing toward her goals while also offering the comfort of companionship. As Aline navigated the challenges of her academic life, long nights of studying, financial stress, and the constant pressure to succeed, Wesley became her quiet refuge. They shared their dreams, their fears, and their frustrations. Wesley understood Aline's need to prove herself, to rise above the expectations of her family and society. In return, Aline admired Wesley's relentless pursuit of his passion for music, even in the face of uncertainty. Together, they formed a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. Wesley's unwavering belief in her abilities gave Aline the strength to continue, even when the odds seemed stacked against her. And for the first time in her life, Aline realized that love didn't have to mean losing herself. Instead, it could mean finding someone who would walk beside her, not ahead of her or behind her. The relationship was far from perfect. They both struggled, Wesley with his music career, which was slow to take off, and Aline with the overwhelming demands of her studies and financial burdens. There were moments of doubt, where Aline questioned whether she could balance it all, and times when Wesley wondered if his music would ever be enough to sustain them. But through every challenge, they faced it together. Wesley's modesty and dedication reminded Aline that success wasn't about instant recognition or wealth, it was about staying true to oneself and persevering through the hard times. And in that shared belief, they found strength. Their love wasn't a fairy tale Aline had once dreamed of as a little girl, nor was it the glamorous life her family had envisioned for her. But it was real, and it was theirs. As the months passed, Aline grew not only as a student but as a person. She became more confident in her abilities and more certain of the path she had chosen. With Wesley by her side, she learned that it was okay to rely on someone else occasionally, that asking for help didn't mean she was weak. Wesley showed her that love could be a source of strength, not a distraction. Despite the hardships they faced, Aline's life began to take shape in ways she hadn't expected. She didn't have all the answers, and her future was still uncertain, but with Wesley, she knew she wasn't alone. Together, they faced the storms, not as two individuals trying to survive, but as partners who believed in each other and the dreams they were chasing. And as Aline looked ahead, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could have it all: intelligence, love, and the life she had always dreamed of, even if it didn't fit into the mold her family or society had set for her. With Wesley, she was building something far more valuable, something real. However, when Wesley disappears without explanation, Aline finds herself adrift, struggling to piece her life back together and discover what truly matters. Do you think she will succeed? Watch and find out. Hello, welcome. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. In her childhood, Aline decided that girls could either be beautiful or smart, and she chose to be smart. Her older sister, Dorothea, was the epitome of beauty in everyone's eyes, with her silky blonde hair, green eyes like a mermaid's, and a model-like figure. Dorothea was the center of admiration from an early age, focusing on her appearance, reading fashion magazines filled with makeup tips and diet advice. Their mother, raising two daughters alone, had great hopes for Dorothea, imagining a good life for her as soon as she married. Aline was perplexed at how her mother could place the responsibility for her happiness and well-being in someone else's hands. She could only sigh. To her, although her mother was beautiful and kind, she seemed too frivolous, believing that a woman's appearance was the key to her success. Pragmatic and responsible, Aline thought that hard work was necessary for success and that depending on men, as her mother and sister did, was unstable and illusory. Dorothea playfully referred to Aline as a nerd, and their mother tried to impose her own views on Aline, believing it was for her daughter's benefit. "I'm worried about your future. Don't you see? You're so beautiful. You inherited the best from me and your father. Once you finish school, we'll find you a rich husband. Just try not to be such a boring nerd. Men prefer cheerful, smiling girls," her mother would say. "No, thanks. I'm going to study economics after school," Aline would reply. "You know how competitive that field is," Dorothea always argued. "You have to be exceptional or have good connections." "Yes," their mother would sigh. "We can't afford education, and you probably won't get a free spot." Despite her family's objections, Aline remained focused on her goal. She spent days and nights studying, taking online courses, most of which were free since her mother, a cashier at a local supermarket, couldn't afford to pay for her education. Their father was barely present in their lives, as he had started a new family. He sent some money, but that was all, no communication, support, or help in difficult times. Aline learned early not to count on him. Deep down, she wanted to meet and talk to her father at least once, to show him what she had achieved. Aline reached her first goal: she was admitted to study economics on a full scholarship, something she had longed for. She was so overjoyed to see her name on the list of accepted students that she screamed and jumped in front of her computer. "Are you crazy?" Dorothea entered the room, carrying her newborn son, Duarte. She had recently become a mother. The child's father paid child support but showed no interest in Dorothea or Duarte. The payments were minimal, likely due to hidden income, a common tactic to pay less. So, Dorothea's plan had failed, but she hadn't given up on her dreams of a prince who would solve all her financial problems. Their mother fully supported her elder daughter and adored her grandson. Aline was also happy to take care of the baby when she had time, but she couldn't understand how her sister hadn't learned from what had happened. She believed it was time for Dorothea to choose a different path, but her sister continued searching for wealthier men on dating sites. "I got into the university," Aline explained to her perplexed sister. "Wow, that's great. So, are you moving away from us now?" Sure, sometimes Aline wanted to go out and have fun, but she realized that every minute counted. Her mother diligently deposited a small amount into her account. It was a significant part of her mother's salary, and Aline was extremely grateful, though it wasn't enough to live on in the city. It was her mother's support that kept Aline afloat. Aline saved on everything possible but remained optimistic. She was confident she was getting closer to her goal and that everything would eventually fall into place, just as she had dreamed. But in her third year, right before Christmas and New Year's, an event happened that made Aline reconsider her plans and turned her life upside down. Aline was preparing for her History of Economics exam when her sister called. Aline immediately sensed that something was wrong. Dorothea wouldn't call at 3 a.m. without reason. "Mom's in trouble," Dorothea's voice trembled. She sounded on the verge of hysteria. "Please come." What happened? Aline felt a cold fear spreading through her. Her heart tightened with anxiety. "She was hit by a bus," Dorothea managed to say. "Is she okay?" Dorothea was too upset to give coherent answers, sobbing and only able to speak in fragments. It seemed the accident had occurred earlier that evening, but Dorothea had only been informed minutes ago. Aline immediately abandoned her exam preparations and took the first bus home. The urgency in her sister's voice had sent a chill through her, and as the bus rattled down the familiar roads, her mind raced with worst-case scenarios. She had never heard Dorothea sound so fragile, so desperate. When Aline finally arrived, she found Dorothea in a terrible state. Her hair was disheveled, her face swollen from hours of crying, and her eyes red and distant, as if she had cried herself into exhaustion. She was clutching her youngest daughter, Eleanor, who was only 1 year old at the time. By then, Dorothea was a mother of 3, her eldest son Duarte, a rambunctious 5-year-old, and her 2 daughters, Paulette and Eleanor. The house felt heavy with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional soft murmur of the children or Dorothea's quiet sobs. Aline looked around, noticing how much her sister had been struggling to keep it all together. The toys scattered across the floor, the half-empty bottles and dishes that had piled up, and the crumpled laundry all told the story of someone overwhelmed and barely managing to stay afloat. "Dorothea, what's going on?" Aline asked softly, though she already had an idea. Her heart ached at the sight of her sister so broken. Dorothea didn't respond right away. She just held Eleanor closer, as if the small weight of her daughter could somehow ground her in the middle of the emotional storm she was going through. It was only after a few moments that she began to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do anymore, Aline. I keep making the same mistake. I thought this time would be different, that maybe this time we'd be a real family." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, thick with regret and resignation. Aline knew all too well the pattern her sister had fallen into, falling for men who promised the world, only to leave as soon as they grew bored or tired of the responsibility. None of the fathers of her children were involved in raising them. They had been interested only in fleeting flings with Dorothea, never sticking around long enough to take on the role of father. Despite this, Dorothea had repeatedly made the same mistake. Each time she got involved with someone new, she clung to the hope that this man would be the one to provide her with the happy, stable family she so desperately craved. And each time, she ended up disappointed, left to raise another child on her own. It was a cycle Aline had watched from the sidelines for years, and no matter how much she tried to reason with her sister, Dorothea never seemed to learn. As Aline crouched down beside her, gently taking Eleanor from her sister's trembling arms, she felt a mix of anger, frustration, and deep sadness. How many more times would Dorothea need to go through this before she realized that the answer wasn't in these men? That her worth wasn't tied to the promises they made and broke. "Dorothea, you don't need them," Aline said, her voice firmer now. "You can't keep putting your happiness in someone else's hands, hoping they'll fix everything. You're stronger than that. You have these kids to think about, and they need you more than anything." Tears welled up in Dorothea's eyes again as she shook her head, as if she couldn't quite believe Aline's words. "But I'm alone," she whispered. "How can I do this by myself?" Aline sighed and shifted Eleanor to her other arm, feeling the weight of her sister's burdens settle heavily on her shoulders. "You're not alone. You have me, and we'll figure this out together. But first, you need to stop chasing this idea of the perfect family. You already have a family right here," she said, gesturing toward the children, "and they need you to be present for them, not chasing after men who don't care." Dorothea's gaze followed Aline's hand, landing on her children, who were quietly playing in the corner. For the first time in what felt like ages, Aline saw a flicker of realization cross her sister's face. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to understand. "I don't know if I can do it," Dorothea admitted, her voice breaking. "You can," Aline insisted, reaching out to take her sister's hand. "You've already done the hardest part, you've survived. Now, you just need to stop looking for validation from these men. We'll make a plan. We'll get through this together." Over the next few days, Aline stayed with Dorothea, helping her regain some sense of control over her chaotic life. They worked together to create a routine for the children, cleaned the house, and even made a budget plan to stretch what little money they had. Slowly but surely, Aline helped her sister see that she didn't need a man to be complete, that she could build a stable, loving environment for her children on her own. It wasn't easy. Dorothea struggled with feelings of abandonment and loneliness, and there were moments when she almost fell back into her old habits of looking for comfort in the wrong places. But with Aline's steady presence, she began to find strength within herself. As Aline watched her sister begin to rebuild her life, she couldn't help but think about her own choices. She had worked so hard to escape the same trap that Dorothea had fallen into, determined to create her own path through education and independence. But now, seeing her sister's vulnerability, Aline realized how deeply ingrained these societal expectations were, how hard it was to break free from the idea that a woman's worth was tied to a man's validation. In helping Dorothea, Aline found a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about escaping the expectations placed on her, it was about empowering those around her to do the same. And as she prepared to return to her studies, she knew that this experience had changed her. She was more determined than ever to build a life on her own terms, and to help others, especially the women in her life, find that same strength. "If something happens to Mom, how will I handle this alone?" Dorothea asked Aline, her eyes full of confusion, as if expecting her to have a solution. Aline was literally ready to lash out at her sister at that moment. It was still unclear what was happening with their mother, and all Dorothea could think about was herself. "How did this happen?" Aline asked. "I don't know," Dorothea stammered, pacing back and forth with her daughter. "They said Mom was crossing the street in the wrong place and stepped in front of the bus. The driver couldn't do anything. He's in shock. He had a heart attack right there. He's in the hospital too." Aline rushed out of the house and took a taxi to the hospital as fast as possible. However, once she arrived, she received devastating news. Their mother had passed away. "She died while you were on your way to the hospital," the doctor said. There was no chance of survival, the injuries were too severe. Aline didn't get to say goodbye to her mother. She blamed herself for her slow reaction, for not being there to hold her mother's hand while she was still alive, though the doctor assured her that her mother had been in a coma and wouldn't have known. Organizing the funeral and supporting her older sister while grieving herself was a challenging task. The most painful realization was that their closest and dearest person was gone forever. Their father didn't attend the funeral. He must have known what happened but never reached out to his daughters to offer support. Perhaps he thought they were adults now, both over 18, and that he no longer had any legal responsibility for them. In that exact moment, Aline decided she would never seek a relationship with him, even if she achieved success in her career. He had shown that he didn't need her, Dorothea, or their mother. It was the final realization that their father was a stranger to her. But Dorothea was different, she needed support. She cried for days, and Aline allowed her to, knowing it would help her sister cope. During that time, Aline took care of her nephews and nieces, and despite the somber circumstances, the children brought smiles to her face. Their playful antics and innocent conversations reminded Aline that life goes on. However, Aline couldn't stay with her sister for long due to her studies and soon returned to the city. Desperately needing money, she began combining her studies with extra work at a cafe. Wesley couldn't help but smile. "We've been together since my parents brought me home from the hospital and introduced me to Kate, my sister." "Wait, she's your sister?" Aline laughed. "I thought she was your girlfriend, that's why I decided to have this conversation today." "Sister, indeed," Wesley said, hugging Aline tighter and breathing in the scent of her hair. Aline and Wesley had started dating. Wesley had liked the pretty waitress for a long time but never approached her, believing that girls wouldn't be interested in a guy who hadn't yet found success. Besides, he was busy with his band, organizing shows. The band was starting to make money with their music, and things were improving. Despite being a rock star, Wesley was shy around girls. He had many friends to joke around with, but Aline was different. She made him feel special, which made him nervous, even though he was used to performing in front of large crowds. Soon, Wesley suggested they live together in Aline's apartment, as it was well located, reasonably priced, and cozy. Wesley moved in and took on the responsibility of paying rent and handling small repairs the apartment occasionally needed. As it turned out, Wesley was an excellent cook, surpassing Aline's culinary skills. Being a creative person, he crafted masterpieces both in the recording studio and in the kitchen. He was kind, sensitive, and attentive, completely immersed in his creativity without neglecting his favorite person. They often talked, took walks, and even discussed new songs Wesley was composing. Occasionally, Aline would contribute a phrase or a word to his songs, and Wesley eagerly incorporated her ideas, making her proud of her contribution to what could become a hit. Aline was completely immersed in her feelings and the new experiences. Before meeting Wesley, she didn't understand what it was to love a man, she had been too busy with her studies and survival. She found immense joy in being with a man who showed her genuine care, admiration, and affection. She treasured the warmth of his touch, knowing that this dark-eyed man would do anything for her. However, her sister Dorothea disapproved of her choice. As always, Dorothea had her own standards. "He's poor, doesn't have his own apartment, a stable job, or a business," she argued. "But he's a musician," Aline countered. "He has his own rock band. So what? Who even needs them? Those one-day bands are a dime a dozen. There's no guarantee they'll succeed. I think you might be with the wrong person, given how beautiful you are. Well, I have 3 kids who need me. I'm content with what I have. I don't complain." But Aline had hoped her sister would understand. They had always been very different. What mattered most to Aline was that she was happy. She was loved. She had someone close and dear to her. Yes, Wesley was going through a tough time, but he was persistent, working towards his goal, making the right connections, and planning things out. Alan supported Wesley in all his ventures, and he appreciated her loyalty. He often told her how grateful he was for her presence in his life. One day, Wesley embarked on a risky endeavor. He invited a famous rock band to perform in their town, planning for his own band to be the opening act, which was expected to increase their popularity. Organizing such an event was also a way to earn decent income. However, things didn't go as planned. The concert didn't attract as many attendees as expected due to a major rock festival happening in a nearby region. Wesley had overlooked this and ended up facing significant losses. The costs for musician fees, venue rental, equipment, and promotional activities were only partially covered by ticket sales. Although the show itself was fantastic, Wesley ended up with substantial debts that needed to be paid off quickly. Alan found it difficult to watch her beloved in such distress. He seemed confused and worried. Wesley took out a loan, but it was just a drop in the ocean. His friends helped, and the situation improved slightly, but the debt was still considerable. That's when Alan offered to help. She had savings set aside for her studies and even did something she had long resisted: she took out a loan herself. It was enough to cover the debt. "Where did you get the money?" Wesley was surprised when Alan handed him several bundles of cash. "My friend paid back some money she had borrowed, and the insurance company finally settled my mom's accident claim," Alan lied. She knew that if Wesley found out it was her last bit of money, he would never accept it. "Thank you," Wesley hugged Alan tightly. "I'll pay everything back, you'll see. Soon we'll be successful, and I'll repay it all." Wesley settled the debt and continued working with his band, while Alan slowly paid off her loan. Saving for her studies was no longer an option, and overall, her income had suddenly decreased. The bar where she worked was going through hard times, but fortunately, Wesley took over most of the expenses, buying groceries and paying the rent. However, his income was unstable, consisting of money from occasional performances at corporate events and sporadic part-time jobs. Still, Alan didn't worry much about her financial situation. She basked in Wesley's attention and care, reciprocating with love and support. She didn't think too much about the future. If she couldn't return to university this year, there was always next year. The most important thing was that Wesley was with her. And then, Wesley disappeared. No, he didn't run away from Alan, and nothing terrible had happened to him. It all started with a business trip. "Can you believe it?" Wesley exclaimed, hugging Alan tightly, his eyes shining with excitement. "I've been invited to Dubai to compose music for a band. They found me online, liked my work, and now they want me to join them." Alan was in disbelief. She knew the band Wesley was referring to. They were popular musicians who toured globally. And they had noticed Wesley. They were offering him a collaboration. It was unbelievable. "I'll have to leave for a while," Wesley continued. "Do you realize what this means?" Alan understood perfectly well what it meant: money, fame, and endless opportunities for Wesley's growth as a musician. It also meant connections that could open doors he had only dreamed of. But it also meant they would be apart for an indefinite period. Wesley made it clear that he would have to go alone. He started preparing for the trip, finding a temporary replacement for his band, ensuring his passport and other documents were in order, and gathering the necessary items for his journey. Amid all the chaos, Wesley was too consumed with the excitement of the upcoming changes to remember Alan. She watched silently, knowing that once in that foreign country, surrounded by new experiences and the thrill of success, he would forget her. Perhaps he would even meet someone there. Still, every night Wesley reassured her gently, expressing how much he longed for her. "The time will fly by," he would say. "We'll have video calls, and we'll always be connected. Besides, I'll finally be able to provide for us properly. I'll pay you back, I know you need the money. Maybe we'll even be able to buy an apartment. My band will get noticed, and I'll gain invaluable experience. I'll make so much money, everything will be fine." Wesley truly believed it, and Alan could see he wasn't lying. But something told her that things would change once he was abroad. Wesley just didn't realize it yet. In the end, everything unfolded just as Alan had anticipated. Wesley called daily as promised, sharing his experiences from his new location. He was overwhelmed by everything: new impressions, new opportunities. Then, without warning, he stopped calling. He didn't answer her calls, and the long, unanswered rings always ended with a message stating the line was busy. Initially alarmed that something terrible might have happened to him, Alan's fears were put to rest when she saw Wesley performing with his band on a music channel. He looked different, more mature, more serious than usual. Clearly, nothing was wrong with him, he had simply decided to start a new life, severing old ties, including forgetting about Alan. Alan still held out hope for a call from Wesley, an explanation, but he had disappeared completely from her life. She developed the habit of watching the music channel daily, occasionally catching glimpses of Wesley. He was never the focus, but the camera would sometimes capture him in the background. There was often a girl with him, the same one every time. Perhaps she was a makeup artist or a stylist for the band. She was beautiful and vibrant, and it seemed likely there was something between her and Wesley. Alan felt an intense envy, not only of Wesley and his new girlfriend but also of his new life, the excitement, the success. The pain she felt was unprecedented, worsened by the fear of loneliness and the lack of support. The unpleasant mixture of emotions overwhelmed her, and her financial struggles only added to her worries. Alan's meager salary barely kept her afloat, and the situation worsened when she lost her job at the bar after it went bankrupt and was taken over by new owners, who turned it into a hookah lounge. Aline stood at the edge of the empty lot where her family's home once stood, staring at the vacant space that now only held memories. The house had been sold to cover debts, and its absence felt like the final nail in the coffin of a life she once knew. This place held so much for her: childhood laughter, hard lessons, dreams forged in quiet moments, and the support of the family she'd lost too soon. Now, all that remained was a hollow piece of land, a symbol of everything slipping away from her. The loss of the house was yet another blow in a string of misfortunes that seemed never-ending. Aline's life had once felt full of potential, but recently, it had unraveled faster than she could keep up. She thought back to Wesley. He would have understood how much the house had meant to her. If he were still with her, he would have known how to comfort her, maybe even helped her find a way to keep it. Wesley always knew how to make things feel lighter, more bearable. His presence had once been a source of strength, and life had seemed easier with him by her side. But Wesley wasn't here. He was thousands of miles away, chasing his own dreams, and it seemed that somewhere along the way, he had forgotten about her entirely. Aline had tried to justify his silence at first, perhaps he was busy, or maybe he had lost his phone. But as the weeks turned into months with no word from him, she had to face the painful truth: Wesley wasn't coming back. He had moved on, and she was left to pick up the pieces of their shared plans, alone. She thought about the loan she had taken out for him, a decision that now weighed on her like an anchor. When Wesley had told her about the opportunity to sign with a producer and launch his music career, Aline hadn't hesitated to offer her financial help. She believed in him, believed in their future together, and saw the loan as an investment in that shared future. But after Wesley disappeared, she was left to shoulder the debt alone, with no job and no support. Wesley didn't know about the loan. He didn't know that she had lost her job shortly after he left, or that she had been struggling just to keep her head above water. Even if he did know, Aline doubted it would matter to him now. After all, he hadn't reached out in months. What difference would her struggles make to someone who had already walked away? The weight of it all felt crushing. She had given so much to Wesley, not just financially, but emotionally. She had invested her love, her trust, and her future in him, only to be left behind without an explanation. The sense of betrayal gnawed at her, but what hurt even more was the realization that, despite everything, she still missed him. She missed the way he made her feel hopeful, the way he talked about their life together as if it were an unbreakable promise. But promises had been broken, and now Aline was left to pick up the shattered pieces. Her dreams of a future with Wesley, the home she had grown up in, her job, all of it was gone. She felt like a failure, even though she knew, deep down, that she had done everything she could to keep it all together. As Aline stood on the vacant lot, she let herself grieve, not just for the house, but for everything that had been taken from her: her love, her stability, her sense of direction. She had spent so much time trying to be strong, trying to move forward, but now, in the quiet of this empty place, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her losses. She took a deep breath and looked at the sky, searching for some kind of sign, something to remind her that all wasn't lost. Wesley was gone, and with him, the life she had imagined for them. But as painful as it was, Aline knew she had to stop waiting for him to come back. She couldn't hold on to the hope that he would suddenly remember her and come rushing back into her life. That chapter was over. Now, it was time to rebuild, without Wesley, without the house, without the life she thought she'd have. She had survived heartbreak before, and she would survive this. Aline wiped her tears and took one last look at the empty lot before turning away. She had made it through the darkest days, and while the future was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let this defeat her. It was time to let go and start again, and this time, she wouldn't rely on anyone but herself. Alan urgently needed a well-paying job. She searched diligently through job ads, hoping to find a solution to her financial troubles. Although her landlord had generously agreed to wait for rent, she knew his patience was limited. One job advertisement stood out because of the attractive salary it offered. The job was for a caregiver to look after a sick girl. The ad didn't specify the girl's condition, but it was clear she needed round-the-clock care, including hourly medication and being accompanied to medical procedures. Alan had experience caring for small children thanks to her niece and Dorothea's kids. She enjoyed looking after her nephews and knew how to keep them entertained. However, this job was different. It involved a potentially seriously ill child. Despite her reservations, Alan decided to pursue the opportunity. She called the contact number in the ad and spoke with a pleasant man who asked about her age, occupation, education, and experience with children. After the call, she was invited for an interview. As the interview approached, Alan became increasingly nervous. She desperately needed this job and the salary that came with it. She was full of anxiety, worried about what would happen if she didn't get the position. A taxi took Alan to a beautiful settlement of country houses, tall and elegant homes surrounded by fences. A woman named Loretta, as Alan would later learn, met her at the gate. Her employer, Senor Pereira, a man in his 40s with sharp, intelligent blue eyes and slightly graying hair, perfectly styled, greeted Alan in the living room. His athletic figure suggested he prioritized health and appearance, and Alan suddenly felt insignificant next to him. "Good morning," Senor Pereira greeted her warmly, instantly easing her discomfort. His open, kind smile made her feel more at ease. "Hello," Alan smiled back. "I'm here about the ad." "Excellent. Let me tell you up front that I need a caregiver for my daughter, Deborah. She's in a bad condition, and it's not something everyone can handle. The doctor monitors her health daily. I could hire a nurse, but she's already had too many people in white coats in her life. I'd like someone else to be there for her. Perhaps a cheerful young woman like you, who knows many songs and fairy tales, can lift her spirits, inspire her, and come up with fun activities. Basically, someone to brighten her free time." "What's wrong with your daughter?" Alan couldn't help but ask. "No one knows," Pereira lowered his eyes, which suddenly darkened with worry and tension. "No one can figure out what's happening to her. It's as if her body is deteriorating. There's no sign of autoimmune aggression. They run constant tests, and they would have noticed if there was. But she's wasting away, and nothing seems to help." "Poor girl," Alan exclaimed. "The doctors are doing their best. I have the resources to help, as you can see, but they aren't omnipotent, unfortunately. In general, Deborah doesn't just need a caregiver. Loretta, our beloved au pair, takes care of that. She can feed her and give her medication on time. We don't need just a nurse either. Deborah is supervised by a nurse who performs all the necessary procedures. Deborah needs a friend, someone to make her smile. The doctors say that's very important for her condition, and looking at you, I believe you're exactly what she needs, young, beautiful, cheerful, with a kind look in your eyes. I can tell you know how to empathize." Alan already felt eager to meet Deborah. If the little girl needed positive emotions, Alan was determined to provide them. She would brighten the girl's gray everyday life and find ways to make her life more enjoyable. "If you're ready to start immediately," Senor Pereira continued, "then let's begin. Let's say a trial period of 3 days, and then Deborah will decide. Of course, you'll be paid for your time regardless. Do you accept?" "Yes," Alan nodded. "Great," Senor Pereira affirmed. "Loretta will introduce you to Deborah, and I need to go, business matters." After Senor Pereira left, Loretta, a middle-aged woman with a surprisingly gentle and welcoming demeanor, turned to Alan with a question. "Do you have experience with how small children are?" "I have nieces," Alan replied. "That's good," Loretta said, "but know that Deborah is an unusual child. You probably realize that already. Deborah almost never gets out of bed, she tires easily and is hard to engage. But you must try. Deborah needs to be distracted from her pain and discomfort, and she needs to walk for at least an hour each day, that's what the doctor said." "I understand." "Well, let's meet her," Alan said. She followed Loretta upstairs and into the nursery. It was a spacious, princess-themed room with a large window inviting plenty of daylight. Shelves lined with expensive toys and books stretched across the walls, and in the center of the room was a mini playground, complete with a slide, swings, and even a trampoline. Near the window was a large round bed with a pink canopy. Alan looked around with curiosity, never having seen a room like this before. Could all of this really belong to a single child? Despite the room's splendor, Alan initially didn't see the little occupant. The girl was lying on the bed, surrounded by large stuffed toys. There was a cat, a fluffy white bear, and a brightly colored crocodile. A frail, 7-year-old girl, pale and almost blending into the white bedding due to her unhealthy complexion, lay quietly among the toys. Here is the English translation. Her large blue eyes, which resembled her father's, observed the newcomers with curiosity. Deborah propped herself up on her elbows, a task that seemed to require great effort, and addressed Loretta. "Is this a new rehabilitation for you?" The complex word rolled off the young girl's tongue with ease and familiarity, sounding strangely out of place. "No, dear, this is your new friend Aline. You two will play together," said Loretta. Deborah brightened slightly. "Whatever you want," she responded with a smile. The girl evoked feelings of sympathy and pity. "I really like playing with dolls, which is good because Loretta doesn't have time, and Daddy doesn't know how to play," she added. "I don't have much to do," Aline shrugged. "That's why it can be boring sometimes," suggested Deborah with a smile. Aline nodded in agreement, and Deborah giggled softly. "Well, I can see you two are going to get along well," said Loretta, genuinely happy. "Have fun here, and I'll go prepare dinner. Oh, and Deborah, remember that the nurses are coming to see you today." "I remember," the girl frowned. "Another 4 injection. What can we do, dear?" Loretta kissed the girl on the top of her head and left the room. Aline was left alone with Deborah. "Well, shall we play? You have so many beautiful toys here, my eyes are dazzled." Aline turned to her new charge with a smile. "Better read me something," requested the girl. The brief conversation seemed to have consumed the last of her energy. Deborah sank into the pillows and pulled the blanket over her thin body, though the room was warm. "All right," Aline agreed, shocked by the child's weakness. 7-year-old children are usually full of energy, like Duarte, Aline's eldest nephew, who was the same age as Deborah. He couldn't sit still for 5 minutes, always exploring and inventing things. If he were in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or sliding down the slide. Dorothea referred to him as the perpetual motion machine. His younger sisters followed him everywhere. But poor Deborah could only lie in bed. What do you want me to read? About princesses. There's a book on the windowsill. Loretta started reading it to me yesterday, but she ran out of time. It was a large, beautiful book with vivid illustrations. However, to Aline, the story seemed silly, dull, predictable, and formulaic. She had never liked fairy tales as a child. How about we make up a story about these princesses instead? Aline suggested. As expected, Deborah's tired eyes lit up with interest. How do we do that? She asked for clarification. It's simple. I start, and you continue. The activity captivated Deborah. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. They raced in a car, were kidnapped by a dragon, and later rescued by a prince. Deborah's imagination ran wild, surprising even herself. Then Loretta entered the room and brought lunch, mashed soup and boiled potatoes, but Deborah grumbled. I don't want to eat, she said. Especially not this. Loretta looked at Aline, clearly hoping for any help. Let me feed her, Aline offered. Each spoonful will be another princess adventure. I'll make them up as we go. What do you think will finish first, your food or my imagination? The trick worked, and the food was finished before Aline's story ended. But Deborah wanted more. Loretta was genuinely happy and smiling as she left the room. A little later, a nurse entered the nursery, and Deborah immediately looked sullen. The fourth, the girl asked the nurse hopefully. The nurse nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt, and you can rest afterward. And we'll have coffee in the meantime, said Loretta, taking Aline to the kitchen, where steaming cups of coffee and a freshly baked pie were waiting on the table. You and Deborah seem to be getting along well, the woman said warmly. And that's great. She didn't like her previous nanny, but she took to you right away. I've already called Mr. Pereira and told him everything. He's very pleased and happy. He asked me to take good care of you, and of the girl, too. Aline smiled. I feel sorry for Deborah. My nephews are so full of life, and she can only lie in bed and can't play. It's terrible and unfair. What do the doctors say? What are her chances? No prognosis, Loretta shook her head. They can't even make a diagnosis. They've just been treating the symptoms. After David's treatment, she'll feel better for a while. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap. Is Mr. Pereira the girl's father? Yes. And where is her mother? On a business trip. She has a demanding job, so she can't care for her daughter. If only. Loretta sighed. Rose is gone. The childbirth was difficult, and the doctors were so focused on saving the baby that they didn't realize the mother needed help. The day after the birth, Rose had internal bleeding, a rare case. Her large blue eyes, which resembled her father's, observed the newcomers with curiosity. Deborah propped herself up on her elbows, a task that seemed to require great effort, and addressed Loretta. Is this a new rehabilitation for you? The complex word rolled off the young girl's tongue with ease and familiarity, sounding strangely out of place. No, dear, this is your new friend Aline. You two will play together, said Loretta. Deborah brightened slightly. Whatever you want, she responded with a smile. The girl evoked feelings of sympathy and pity. I really like playing with dolls, which is good because Loretta doesn't have time, and Daddy doesn't know how to play, she added. I don't have much to do, Aline shrugged. That's why it can be boring sometimes, suggested Deborah with a smile. Aline nodded in agreement, and Deborah giggled softly. Well, I can see you two are going to get along well, said Loretta, genuinely happy. Have fun here, and I'll go prepare dinner. Oh, and Deborah, remember that the nurses are coming to see you today. I remember, the girl frowned. Another 4 injection. What can we do, dear? Loretta kissed the girl on the top of her head and left the room. Aline was left alone with Deborah. Well, shall we play? You have so many beautiful toys here, my eyes are dazzled. Aline turned to her new charge with a smile. Better read me something, requested the girl. The brief conversation seemed to have consumed the last of her energy. Deborah sank into the pillows and pulled the blanket over her thin body, though the room was warm. All right, Aline agreed, shocked by the child's weakness. 7-year-old children are usually full of energy, like Duarte, Aline's eldest nephew, who was the same age as Deborah. He couldn't sit still for 5 minutes, always exploring and inventing things. If he were in this room, he would immediately start jumping on the trampoline or sliding down the slide. Dorothea referred to him as the perpetual motion machine. His younger sisters followed him everywhere. But poor Deborah could only lie in bed. What do you want me to read? About princesses. There's a book on the windowsill. Loretta started reading it to me yesterday, but she ran out of time. It was a large, beautiful book with vivid illustrations. However, to Aline, the story seemed silly, dull, predictable, and formulaic. She had never liked fairy tales as a child. How about we make up a story about these princesses instead? Aline suggested. As expected, Deborah's tired eyes lit up with interest. How do we do that? She asked for clarification. It's simple. I start, and you continue. The activity captivated Deborah. She was inspired to invent adventures for the princess. They raced in a car, were kidnapped by a dragon, and later rescued by a prince. Deborah's imagination ran wild, surprising even herself. Then Loretta entered the room and brought lunch, mashed soup and boiled potatoes, but Deborah grumbled. I don't want to eat, she said. Especially not this. Loretta looked at Aline, clearly hoping for any help. Let me feed her, Aline offered. Each spoonful will be another princess adventure. I'll make them up as we go. What do you think will finish first, your food or my imagination? The trick worked, and the food was finished before Aline's story ended. But Deborah wanted more. Loretta was genuinely happy and smiling as she left the room. A little later, a nurse entered the nursery, and Deborah immediately looked sullen. The fourth, the girl asked the nurse hopefully. The nurse nodded sympathetically. I'll do it quickly. Don't worry, it won't hurt, and you can rest afterward. And we'll have coffee in the meantime, said Loretta, taking Aline to the kitchen, where steaming cups of coffee and a freshly baked pie were waiting on the table. You and Deborah seem to be getting along well, the woman said warmly. And that's great. She didn't like her previous nanny, but she took to you right away. I've already called Mr. Pereira and told him everything. He's very pleased and happy. He asked me to take good care of you, and of the girl, too. Aline smiled. I feel sorry for Deborah. My nephews are so full of life, and she can only lie in bed and can't play. It's terrible and unfair. What do the doctors say? What are her chances? No prognosis, Loretta shook her head. They can't even make a diagnosis. They've just been treating the symptoms. After David's treatment, she'll feel better for a while. Take her for a walk after her afternoon nap. Is Mr. Pereira the girl's father? Yes. And where is her mother? On a business trip. She has a demanding job, so she can't care for her daughter. If only. Loretta sighed. Rose is gone. The childbirth was difficult, and the doctors were so focused on saving the baby that they didn't realize the mother needed help. The day after the birth, Rose had internal bleeding, a rare case. Deborah was also in the ICU. She was born prematurely. It was a difficult time. That's a shame, Loretta agreed. Let me tell you the whole story. You seem to be here for a while, so you should know. Donald Pereira grew up in a prosperous family, surrounded by loving parents and a wealth of opportunities. He had his own room, annual summer trips to the beach, birthdays celebrated with friends, and a happy childhood that extended into a joyful youth. Thanks to his parents' investment in his education, he graduated from school with honors. They made sure he had the best tutors to fill any gaps in his learning. Mr. Pereira's parents had waited for a child for many years. When they had accepted their fate, God gave them an unexpected gift, a son. Naturally, Donald became the center of their attention, and he was never ashamed of his older parents. In fact, he was proud of them. His father was a businessman, and his mother was a doctor at the hospital. They were respected throughout the city. As Donald grew older, his parents aged quickly. When Donald was in his third year of university, his father passed away, stroke, intensive care, coma, and that was it. Suddenly, Donald found himself managing the family business, left to him as an inheritance. Though he had shown interest in his father's business during his teenage years and had some knowledge of its operations, he relied heavily on a friend of his late father. Donald had to juggle his studies, the business, and supporting his grieving mother, who was devastated by the loss of her husband. 3 years passed. Donald Pereira had just received his diploma, taken over his father's company, and begun to prosper. Then tragedy struck again. This time, it was his mother. Donald was left alone, feeling desolate and isolated in the large family home. Fortunately, Loretta, the family's longtime housekeeper, who was almost like a member of the family, was there. She had known Donald Pereira since he was a baby and treated him like her own son. Not having children of her own, she devoted all her care to the grieving young man. It was hard for him, Loretta observed, shaking her head. He was just a boy, but work saved him. He had to make decisions, hold meetings, and close deals, and over time, Donald transformed from an inexperienced young man into a shrewd businessman. He matured quickly, gained autonomy, and established himself in the business world. Of course, there was nothing particularly special about it, Loretta continued. Sure, some girls were interested in Donald. He was handsome and rich, which made him desirable. Sometimes, he would go out with a few of them, but I could tell they weren't his type, and I didn't like them either. It seemed like they were only after his money. Then Rose came into his life. Donald literally met Rose on the street. She was rushing to an interview at Mr. Pereira's company, as he would later find out. Rose worked as an accountant and had recently been laid off, so she was looking for a new position. Donald was simply out for a walk to get some fresh air but also had the intention of buying donuts at a nearby bakery. As Rose hurriedly turned the corner, she bumped into him. The scene that followed could have been from a romantic movie. Rose's bag slipped off her shoulder, spilling its contents onto the sidewalk. Both Donald and Rose scrambled to pick everything up, while Rose apologized profusely. Donald couldn't take his eyes off her beautiful gray eyes. It was love at first sight. When the young pair organized the scattered items in Rose's bag, they stood up at the same time, smiled at each other, and Donald, being the gentleman, made the first move. He asked the name of the beautiful stranger and then introduced himself. A real romance blossomed. I had never seen Donald so happy. Rose was smart, understanding, and kind, quickly finding a common language with me. A few years after they met, Donald and Rose got married. They were a wonderful couple, harmonious and happy. Love, mutual understanding, and respect were the pillars of their relationship. It warmed my heart to see them together. They decided not to rush into having children. They traveled, worked, and socialized, but in my old-fashioned way, I advised them not to wait too long. I wanted to take care of their child, but Donald and Rose had lived for themselves for too long. 5 years after their marriage, they didn't want children yet, not immediately, but later, when they were happy with everything. Then came the news of Rose's pregnancy, which was unexpected but welcomed with joy by everyone. Well, it's time, Rose concluded. The child decided not to wait any longer. Thank God, exclaimed Loretta. I think you'll have a boy. You've become even more beautiful, Rose. Girls steal their mother's beauty during pregnancy. However, Loretta was mistaken. An ultrasound confirmed that Rose was expecting a girl, a healthy, strong girl. Rose's pregnancy, however, was challenging. Initially, she battled toxoplasmosis, which eventually subsided, but other problems arose: high blood pressure, edema. While the baby developed well, Rose's health deteriorated. She lost weight, lost her appetite, and was often bedridden. The normally energetic Rose didn't have the strength to even go down the stairs. In the end, Rose's labor started much earlier than expected. Despite the doctor's attempt to delay the birth, Deborah arrived prematurely and weak. She didn't cry, wasn't placed on Rose's chest, and wasn't even shown to her mother. The process is different when it comes to newborns who should have stayed in the womb for at least 2 more months. Deborah was immediately taken to the intensive care unit, fighting for her life. Rose, on the other hand, initially seemed fine. She was exhausted from labor and worried about her daughter. Her anxiety was apparent and perfectly understandable. After examining Rose and finding no abnormalities, the doctors transferred her to a room. However, severe symptoms appeared too late to be treated. Donald and I were so worried about the baby. Loretta was on the verge of tears. Even 7 years later, the memory was still painful. We were afraid that our little girl wouldn't survive. She was born prematurely and was extremely weak. And then, when Donald received the call the next morning informing him that his wife had died from internal bleeding, he didn't believe it at first. He thought the news was about Deborah. His mind refused to accept what he was hearing. Deborah, however, survived. She was a strong girl, but Rose, she was gone. Donald aged dramatically in the months that followed, barely sleeping or eating. I was worried that he might give up, but he held on. He had to get through it for Deborah's sake. But in truth, he initially harbored feelings toward his daughter, blaming her for what happened to Rose. He knew he was wrong, but he couldn't help it. He was just angry with her, that's all. Deborah was discharged and a nanny was hired to take care of her, as someone had to look after the baby. Loretta was too old for that. She played with Deborah happily, took her for walks in the park in a stroller, and talked to her a lot. She was the only one who gave the newborn the love she needed. She treated Deborah like her own granddaughter. Donald initially avoided the child, although he provided for her needs and occasionally took her for a walk, but only at Loretta's insistence. He never took the initiative. However, when Deborah fell ill with the flu and was hospitalized, Donald had a change of heart. He set his work aside, stayed by his daughter's bedside, sang songs to her, and recited poems. His care seemed to help Deborah's recovery. After Deborah returned home from the hospital, Donald had changed. He became a loving and caring father. Deborah grew up healthy and sharp-minded, bringing joy to both her father and Loretta. Despite this, Loretta worried about Donald's loneliness. It seemed to her that there wouldn't be happiness for him until he met the right woman. Now, that was a very difficult task. The woman Donald chose would have to love and accept Deborah, or else there could be no union. Well, God heard my prayers, Loretta smiled. Donald has Karina. She's beautiful, you can't take your eyes off her. She's also intelligent, and has a daughter a little younger than Deborah. They're a wonderful family. Karina got a job with Donald, and everything started at a company party. So it's the usual story. Karina was kind to Deborah, often taking her and her younger daughter to amusement parks or the movies. Deborah liked Karina and her daughter Mariana very much. She was genuinely happy when Donald and Karina got married and started living together. However, shortly after, Deborah began showing symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, weakness, and loss of appetite. Despite numerous medical consultations, including visits to top clinics and renowned specialists, no diagnosis could be made. Deborah's health was visibly deteriorating. In the first year, she was still able to stand, but Loretta was on the verge of tears again. It was clear that her heart truly ached for the girl. After New Year's, she fell ill, and now she's not well at all. I'm so scared for her, and we still don't know what kind of illness has attacked our little girl," Loretta lamented. Since New Year's, the cause of her illness remained unknown. For Deborah's safety, Karina and her daughter Mariana had temporarily moved into a separate apartment. Mariana was attending kindergarten, potentially bringing infections home, which posed a risk to Deborah. Of course, Karina visits almost every day. She's a good woman, she comes to see Deborah, brings little gifts, and sometimes she brings Mariana, too, when she's not sick. Ever since she started kindergarten, it's been one illness after another. So now, husband and wife live separately. What a family, Loretta sighed. But there's nothing to be done, this is the situation. That's a very strange situation, Aline said, shocked by the whole story. Well, that's how it is, the elderly woman replied. I see that you and Deborah have gotten along well, that's good. She'll be happier with you around. Days passed, and Aline now lived in the room adjacent to Deborah's nursery. However, Deborah often asked for her nanny to stay in her room overnight, where there was a very comfortable sofa. They would talk before bed, holding hands. Aline realized how much this meant to Deborah, who clearly craved attention, despite the presence of several adults. Senor Pereira, a very attentive and caring father, was also a pleasant conversationalist. They frequently discussed Deborah, and he always listened to Aline attentively, never interrupting or disagreeing, asking insightful questions. Aline was introduced to Karina as well. Loretta was right, Karina was indeed a beautiful woman, with sculpted cheekbones, graceful curves, and the elegance of a panther. However, when Karina interacted with Deborah, adjusting the girl's blanket, smiling at her, or stroking her head, Aline sensed insincerity. It was evident in seemingly insignificant details, like a cold glint in her eyes or a disdainful curl of her lips. Something elusive yet deeply unsettling. One night, Aline had a peculiar dream. She found herself in a room with torn wallpaper and uneven floors, sitting on a rough stool by a dark window that offered no view. She realized she was dreaming and tried to wake up, but for some reason, she couldn't. Suddenly, a woman appeared before her as if out of nowhere. Aline recognized her as Deborah's mother, Rose, from the photos she had seen. Rose gave a sad smile and looked at Aline with warm, gentle eyes. Take care of her, Rose said in a quiet, melodic voice. Be careful of Karina, she's dangerous. Rose disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving Aline with many unanswered questions. How was she supposed to watch out for Karina? Why was Karina dangerous? Waking up in a cold sweat, Aline felt as though she had been jolted back into her body. It was a strange sensation, and Rose's words still echoed in her mind. Aline didn't believe in supernatural occurrences, but this dream stayed with her. The next day, Karina didn't come, even though Aline expected her. Aline was now convinced that this woman was involved in something bad. She believed Karina was harming the family and didn't care for Deborah. Aline felt with all her heart that Karina was only pretending to care, lacking genuine empathy for the girl, and she wondered why no one else, not even the experienced Loretta, noticed this. Karina came the next day, as beautiful and vibrant as ever. First, she greeted Deborah before heading to the kitchen. Deborah is thirsty, said Karina, looking at Loretta. Let me make her some cocoa. You rest, I'll do it, Persia hurried. No, I can manage. I feel like I want to do something for her. Oh, you're so thoughtful. Aline remained silent, focusing on Karina as Rose had instructed her in a dream. Loretta was busy with the dough, while Aline pretended to look out the window, but she was watching Karina. Suddenly, she saw Karina skillfully pull a small vial from her sleeve, drip a few drops into the milk, and quickly hide the bottle. It all happened in seconds, quick movements, but Aline saw everything. All done, Karina smiled. Aline, could you hand me her favorite mug, please? Aline obeyed in silence, watching as Karina poured the cocoa into Deborah's favorite mug, decorated with her beloved cartoon characters. Aline realized Deborah shouldn't drink it and had to act quickly. She pretended to slip, bumping into Karina and causing her to spill the mug, which shattered and spilled cocoa all over the floor. "Oh, sorry. I'm so clumsy," Aline apologized, quickly grabbing a cloth to clean up the mess and collect the shards. "I'll make more," Karina replied, her voice tinged with barely concealed irritation. Aline knew she couldn't repeat the act without arousing suspicion. She had to accept that Deborah would receive the cocoa from her stepmother. While Karina and Loretta were with Deborah, Aline wrung the cloth she used to clean up the cocoa into a clean bottle. She intended to have the liquid analyzed to find out exactly what Karina had added to the cocoa. Maybe it was just vitamins, in which case there was no need for alarm. However, she had a feeling it wasn't that simple. Aline had to wait 2 days for the test results. When she saw the report, she was horrified. The drink contained a deadly poison, causing symptoms similar to Deborah's. It was like a horrible fairy tale. Aline was terrified to tell Mr. Pereira about her investigation because he might not believe her, but it was clear that Karina couldn't stay near the girl. She wanted to send her to the other world and had nearly succeeded. Finally, Aline gathered the courage to confide in Mr. Pereira. She reported everything, including her strange dream, the cocoa incident, and the test. She feared his reaction, worried he might simply fire her or accuse her of trying to harm his daughter. "You know, under normal circumstances, I would probably fire you for saying such things. They're quite peculiar, don't you think? However, I need to check out every possibility. For now, don't tell anyone about this, and take some time off. I need to resolve some things. We'll contact you when you can return to work." During her days off, Aline was anxious. She was in the dark about the situation at Mr. Pereira's house and felt worried for Deborah, whom she had grown to care for deeply. When Loretta finally called, Aline was concerned. What would they tell her now? "How did it go?" she asked. "Come," said Loretta. "We have something to tell you. Come quickly. Deborah misses you very much." Aline didn't need much convincing, and within half an hour, she was already at Mr. Pereira's house. The door was opened by the man himself, still calm and composed. His appearance made it hard to guess what had happened. "I want to thank you," the man finally allowed himself to smile. "You were right. Karina, she wanted. I'm afraid to even say it out loud, that wretch wanted to poison Deborah," Loretta exclaimed, forgetting all politeness. "What an evil woman, and to think I trusted her so much." The story was as old and banal as time itself. Karina, driven by greed, was unwilling to tolerate a rival in the form of her wealthy husband's beloved daughter. She wanted her own daughter, Mariana, to be the sole heir to Mr. Pereira's fortune, and, of course, she wanted a part of it herself. Karina, who had studied pharmacy, had never worked a day in her profession, choosing instead to live off the wealth of her rich admirers. Her natural beauty provided her with opportunities for such a lifestyle. The knowledge she gained in college was enough for her to devise a method to send her despised stepdaughter to the grave, a poison, one that is hard to detect in blood or tissue unless specifically tested for. Karina incorporated the toxic substance into the meals she prepared for Deborah, causing the girl to grow weaker, slowly fading away. "I can't believe it, it's incomprehensible," Loretta struggled to calm herself. Aline sympathized with her, and indeed, Karina's actions were monstrous. How could she do something like that to a defenseless child? Deborah trusted her, loved her. Mr. Pereira installed surveillance cameras in the kitchen, and that's when it was revealed that Karina had been adding poison to Deborah's food every time. Karina was also caught in the act. She was now under investigation. Mariana was taken by her father, who had long wanted to spend time with his daughter, but Karina had prevented this in every way possible. "Mariana will be fine," Loretta reassured. "The child isn't responsible for what her mother planned to do." "And how is Deborah?" Aline asked. "Deborah is doing well," a cheerful voice answered from behind. She turned to see Deborah's eyes, and though she was still thin and pale, she had the strength to move around the house. The doctors assured a speedy recovery. Aline and Wesley were strolling through the children's section of the store, surrounded by pinks and purples. Dolls, makeup kits for kids, and plush toys filled the shelves. In Dubai, a friend of mine bought this remote-controlled car for his nephew. Maybe Deborah would like it, Wesley suggested. She's a girl, Aline reminded him, smiling. She definitely wants a doll, a cartoon character. We should try to find one. Maybe by her next birthday, she won't even want toys. Kids grow up so fast, it's amazing. Soon, we'll see for ourselves, Wesley said, placing his hand on Aline's rounded belly. The baby responded with a subtle but noticeable kick. A year after Deborah was rescued from her wicked stepmother, Aline received another surprise. Living with Deborah, she quickly recovered, engaging in active play and asking for trips around the city. Initially, the adults hesitated to reveal the truth about her illness, fearing it might be too traumatic. However, the clever girl pieced together bits of overheard conversations and her own thoughts. Surprisingly, the story didn't affect her as negatively as the adults feared. Deborah accepted it calmly. It's like in fairy tales, she shrugged. By September, Deborah was back at school with her classmates. Meanwhile, Aline finally returned to university, choosing a distance learning program to balance her studies with work. Though her work felt more like family life, with the cheerful Deborah, the kind and wise Loretta, and the always busy but polite and thoughtful Mr. Pereira. With them, Aline felt welcome and cozy. They had embraced her with open arms and were grateful for her role in saving Deborah. They often discussed the strange dream that had changed everything and wondered what could have happened without it. Perhaps Karina had raised Aline's suspicions right away because she hadn't liked Deborah's stepmother from the start. Aline had likely been mulling it over, and it manifested into that unusual dream. One day, Aline was at the university office, handling some paperwork when suddenly Wesley approached her. Aline, in disbelief, took a step back. Wesley appeared both happy and puzzled, smiling at Aline as if no one else in the world mattered. "I finally found you," he exclaimed, pulling her into his embrace. Aline was confused but didn't resist. She leaned into the man she loved, trying to forget his abrupt disappearance. But the explanation was quite simple. Wesley had dropped his phone into the ocean during a steamboat trip. He couldn't get a new SIM card while abroad and had forgotten the password to his account, making it impossible to restore his contacts. Since Aline wasn't on any social media, he had no way to reach her. Wesley even wrote letters, as in the old days, but by then, Aline had already moved in with Mr. Pereira and his family and hadn't received any of them. "I couldn't just abandon everything and leave. It was about my career and our future, our well-being. It was unbearable without you and without any way of contacting you, but I knew I had to wait. I was securing our financial future. Once that was done, I planned to fly to you and explain everything. I didn't know about the problems you were facing, or that you had taken out a loan, or lost your job. You went through such a hard time. Essentially, it was just an unfortunate series of events." Aline was relieved that her feelings and Wesley's were genuine, free from betrayal or deceit. The misunderstandings had finally been resolved. Wesley had secured a contract with a renowned producer in his country. He had everything he dreamed of: concerts, performances, tours, and the chance to share his music with an appreciative audience. And, of course, there was no shortage of money. He had even managed to buy an apartment for them, which was currently being renovated. Wesley and Aline's life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, one built on love, partnership, and the quiet joy of building a future together. Their wedding had been a modest but beautiful affair, surrounded by close friends and family, including Mr. Pereira and Deborah, who had become almost like family to Aline. The once fractured parts of Aline's life had found a way to piece themselves back together, and now, as she and Wesley prepared for the arrival of their first child, she felt a sense of completeness she had once thought impossible. Aline no longer worked for Mr. Pereira. Deborah, who had matured into a bright and independent young girl, no longer required the constant attention and care that had once consumed so much of Aline's time. But despite Aline stepping away from her role, the bond they shared had only deepened. Mr. Pereira was grateful for everything Aline had done for his family, and Deborah adored her like an older sister. They remained close, visiting often and spending time together whenever possible. Now, as Deborah's 9th birthday approached, Aline and Wesley found themselves in a familiar place, a toy store filled with colorful dolls, books, and games. Choosing the perfect gift for Deborah felt special, not just because it was a significant milestone for her, but because it represented how far they had all come. Aline couldn't help but think back to the time when Deborah had been fragile, both physically and emotionally, and how much love and care it had taken to bring her to the bright, confident girl she was now. The thought filled her heart with warmth. Wesley held Aline's hand gently, his thumb brushing over the small swell of her belly where their child was growing. "What do you think she'd like?" he asked, his voice full of quiet excitement. Aline smiled, grateful for his thoughtfulness. Wesley had embraced Deborah as much as she had, and it meant the world to Aline that he was as invested in these moments as she was. "She's into arts and crafts lately," Aline said, scanning the shelves. "Maybe we can find something she can create with, something that'll let her imagination run wild." Wesley nodded, his gaze shifting from the bright toys to the softer, more thoughtful gifts on another shelf. "What about one of these? A DIY jewelry making kit? She can make her own bracelets, necklaces. I bet she'd love it." Aline's face lit up. "That's perfect. Deborah loves anything creative, and this way, she can make things for herself or for her friends." They picked up the kit, inspecting the colorful beads and charms inside. It felt like the ideal gift, something that represented not only Deborah's growing independence but also her nurturing, kind-hearted spirit, traits Aline had watched flourish over the years. As they walked toward the checkout, Wesley's hand found its way to Aline's belly again, a protective gesture that had become second nature to him since they found out they were expecting. "Soon, we'll be picking out gifts for our own little one," he said softly, a mixture of pride and wonder in his voice. Aline smiled, feeling a flutter in her stomach. "I can't wait. It's crazy to think how much has changed. There was a time I wasn't sure if any of this was possible, Deborah's recovery, us finding each other, building this life. It all feels like a dream sometimes." Wesley pulled her closer, placing a gentle kiss on her temple. "It's real, and it's ours. We've come a long way, but we did it together." They left the store, hand in hand, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this point. The events that had once felt like insurmountable challenges had, in many ways, shaped the life they now lived, a life filled with love, hope, and new beginnings. Aline and Wesley knew that their path hadn't been easy, but it had led them to a place of peace and fulfillment that they could never have imagined. On the day of Deborah's birthday, the small garden at Mr. Pereira's house was transformed into a celebration of color and joy. Balloons floated in the breeze, and a table was set up with all of Deborah's favorite snacks. Aline and Wesley arrived early, the jewelry-making kit wrapped in bright paper, ready to give her the gift they had chosen so carefully. When Deborah opened it, her eyes sparkled with delight. "I love it," she exclaimed, hugging Aline tightly before turning to Wesley to offer the same grateful embrace. "Thank you. I can't wait to start making things." Aline watched as Deborah excitedly showed her friends the kit, already making plans for the jewelry she would create. The scene filled Aline with pride and a quiet sense of accomplishment. Deborah's happiness was a reminder that all the hardships they had faced were worth it. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the party wound down, Aline found herself standing with Mr. Pereira, watching Deborah play with her new friends. The older man smiled at her warmly. "She's grown so much, hasn't she?" "She has," Aline agreed. "I'm so proud of her." "And of you," Mr. Pereira added, his voice full of gratitude. You've been such a gift to our family, Aline. I don't know how we would have managed without you. Aline shook her head, feeling a rush of emotion. I've been just as blessed by all of you. Deborah, you, the life I have now. I'm so grateful. As the night drew to a close, Aline and Wesley left the party with a sense of contentment. They had built something beautiful, not just for themselves but for the people they loved. With a baby on the way, a solid partnership, and lasting friendships, Aline knew they had everything they needed for the next chapter of their lives. Deborah's 9th birthday had marked more than just another year. It had been a celebration of resilience, love, and the bonds that had brought them together. And as Aline and Wesley looked ahead, they knew that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them as they always had, together. Hope you enjoyed the story. Like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching.